Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who'll stab you in the back without hesitation. When my parents decided to give away my childhood bedroom to my brother's growing family, they had no idea they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions. What happened next changed our family forever, and let me tell you, the look on their faces when I pulled out those documents was absolutely priceless. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my downtown Portland office. Mom's voice had that particular tone she used when she'd already made a decision and was just informing everyone else about it. "Alice, honey, we need to talk about your old room." I set down my coffee cup and leaned back in my chair. At 28, I'd been living in my own apartment across town for 6 years, but I still kept some belongings in my childhood bedroom at the family house on Maple Grove Avenue. Photos, yearbooks, my grandmother's jewelry box, and a few pieces of furniture I'd inherited from her estate. "What about it, Mom?" "Well, your brother Derek and Christina are having such a hard time with the new baby, and little Emma needs her own space now that she's 4. They're outgrowing that tiny apartment, and you know how expensive rent has gotten in this city." I already knew where this was heading. Derek, my older brother by 3 years, had always been the golden child. Star athlete in high school, decent job at the lumber mill, married his high school sweetheart Christina, and produced 2 adorable grandchildren for my parents to dote on. Meanwhile, I'd focused on building my accounting firm from scratch, working 70-hour weeks, and somehow that made me the expendable one in family discussions. "So you want them to move into the house?" "Just temporarily, sweetie, until they get back on their feet. Derek lost some hours at work when the mill cut back, and with Christina not working because of the baby, they're really struggling. Your father and I talked it over, and we think it's the right thing to do." The right thing to do. That phrase had been used to justify every decision that prioritized Derek's needs over mine since we were kids. When I wanted to join the debate team, they needed the car to drive Derek to football practice. When my college fund got borrowed to pay for Derek's wedding. When I graduated summa cum laude from business school and got a 5-minute congratulations phone call, while Derek's promotion to shift supervisor warranted a full family dinner celebration. Where exactly would they be staying? Mom's pause told me everything. "Well, your room has the most space, and it connects to that little nursery area that used to be the sewing room. It would be perfect for them, really. You could move your things to the basement for now." The basement, where Dad stored his hunting gear and Mom kept her holiday decorations, where the ceiling leaked every winter and the concrete floor stayed perpetually damp. They wanted to move my belongings to their basement so Derek's family could have my room. "Mom, I still stay there sometimes when I'm working late on the books for Henderson's Hardware. Mr. Henderson wants everything done by month end, and it's easier than driving home at midnight." "Oh, honey, you can always stay in the guest room when you need to. It's just temporary." The guest room that doubled as Mom's craft space, with barely enough room for the daybed between her sewing machine and fabric storage containers. The room where I'd be an inconvenience, a visitor in my own childhood home. How temporary are we talking about? Just a few months, 6 at most. Derek thinks he might get promoted to floor supervisor by Christmas, and Christina's been talking about maybe going back to work part-time once the baby's a bit older. Derek had been talking about promotions for 5 years. Christina had been talking about going back to work since Emma was born. Neither of those things had materialized, but my parents continue to believe every optimistic prediction like it was gospel truth. "Did Derek ask you to call me, or was this your idea?" Another pause. "We're family, Alice. Family helps each other out. I thought you'd understand that." The guilt trip was classic, Mom. Frame it as a moral failing on my part for not immediately embracing their plan. Make me the selfish daughter who puts her own comfort above her brother's needs. "When would this happen?" "Well, Derek's lease is up at the end of the month, so we were thinking about next weekend. That gives you time to pack up anything really important." Next weekend? They'd already decided everything. Derek had probably already given notice to his landlord. They weren't asking for my opinion, they were informing me of their decision and expecting my compliance. "I need to think about it."
What's to think about? It's just a bedroom, honey. You have your own apartment. Just a bedroom. The room where I'd spent 17 years of my life, where Grandma Margaret had read me bedtime stories when she lived with us during her final years, where I'd studied for the SATs, cried over my first heartbreak, and celebrated my acceptance to college, where I kept the antique dresser and matching nightstand that Grandma had specifically left to me in her will. I'll call you back tonight, Mom. Alice, don't make this difficult. Your father's already promised Derek they could move in. You know how hard it is for him to change his mind once he's decided something. Of course, Dad had already promised. The decision was made, the conversation was over, and my feelings about it were irrelevant. This phone call was just a courtesy, a way for Mom to feel better about steamrolling over me by pretending she'd gotten my permission. I said I'll call you back tonight. I hung up before she could launch into another guilt-laden speech about family obligations. My hands were shaking slightly as I reached for my coffee cup, and I realized I was angrier than I'd been in years. The smart thing would have been to accept the situation gracefully, to be the good daughter who puts family harmony above personal preferences, to pack my things into boxes and smile while Derek's family took over the room that had been mine for most of my life. But as I sat in my office, looking out at the busy street below, something hardened in my chest. I was tired of being the accommodating one, the daughter whose needs came second, the sister who was expected to sacrifice for everyone else's benefit. I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I hadn't accessed in almost 2 years. Inside were PDF scans of documents I'd received from my grandmother's estate attorney, papers I'd filed away and almost forgotten about in the chaos of building my business. The deed to the house on Maple Grove Avenue, the house my parents had lived in for 35 years, raised their children in, and considered unquestionably theirs. Except it wasn't theirs, not anymore. When Grandma Margaret had gotten sick, really sick, she'd made some financial decisions that my parents never knew about. The house had been in her name originally. She'd bought it in 1962 as a young widow and let my parents move in when they got married with the understanding they'd eventually buy it from her. They never did. Instead, they'd paid what they thought was rent, but what was actually just covering the property taxes and maintenance. And when Grandma's medical bills started mounting, when the treatments weren't covered by insurance and the specialists wanted payment up front, she'd made a choice. She'd left the house to me. Not out of favoritism, according to the letter she'd included with her will, but because she knew I was the only one responsible enough to handle it properly. She'd watched Derek stumble through financial crisis after financial crisis, always needing bailouts, always making optimistic plans that never materialized. She'd also watched my parents enable him, draining their savings account repeatedly to cover his mistakes. Grandma had been afraid that if she left the house to them, they'd eventually mortgage it or sell it to pay for Derek's next emergency, leaving themselves with nothing for their retirement. So she'd left it to me, with instructions to let my parents live there for as long as they wanted, but to make sure the property stayed in responsible hands. I'd planned to tell them eventually, after I got my business established, after the grief over losing Grandma had faded, after the right moment presented itself. But there had never been a right moment, and now my parents were planning to hand over my bedroom to Derek's family as if they had every right to make that decision. Maybe it was time they learned the truth about whose house they were giving away. That evening, I drove to Maple Grove Avenue with a manila folder tucked under my arm. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I was 17. White clapboard siding that Dad repainted every 3 years, Mom's flower garden flanking the front walkway, the old oak tree where Derek had hung a tire swing that still dangled from a thick branch. I parked behind Dad's pickup truck and took a deep breath. Through the living room window, I could see the familiar blue glow of the television and Dad's silhouette in his recliner. Mom would be in the kitchen, probably doing the dinner dishes while watching her evening talk shows on the small TV by the sink. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The front door was unlocked, as always. In 35 years of living in this neighborhood, my parents had maybe locked it a dozen times. "Alice!"
Mom appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. I was wondering when you'd call back. I figured it would be better to talk in person. Dad looked up from his program, some documentary about World War II aircraft. Evening, sweetheart. Your mother told me about the situation with Derek's family. The situation? I sat down on the couch across from his chair. That's one way to put it. Mom settled beside me, her expression hopeful. So, you've thought about it? You understand why this is important? I've thought about it extensively. I placed the manila folder on the coffee table, but kept my hand on it. I have some questions first. Dad muted the television. Questions about what? About this house, about ownership, about who gets to make decisions regarding it. My parents exchanged a glance. Mom's hopeful expression flickered slightly. Alice, this is our house, Dad said slowly. We've lived here since before you were born. We've maintained it, improved it, and paid for every repair and upgrade. Have you thought? Paid for it? The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. What kind of question is that? Mom's voice had taken on a defensive edge. Of course we've paid for it. The mortgage, the taxes, the insurance. What mortgage? Another silence, longer this time. Dad cleared his throat. Alice, I'm not sure what you're getting at here, but there's never been a mortgage on this house. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Grandma Margaret bought it outright in 1962. She let you move in when you got married, but you never actually purchased it from her. Mom was staring at the papers in my hands. She always said we'd work out the details later. But you never did. For 35 years, you lived here without ever officially buying it. What you thought were house payments were actually just covering the property taxes and maintenance costs. Dad's face had gone pale. Margaret never said anything about, we assumed when she moved in with us during her illness that we'd inherited it, family property. You assumed wrong. I pulled out the next document, Grandma's will, specifically the section regarding real estate holdings. Mom leaned forward to read it, her lips moving silently as she worked through the legal language. This can't be right. She left the house to you? She left it to me because she was worried about what would happen if she left it to you. The color drained from Dad's face. What do you mean by that? I pulled out Grandma's letter, 3 pages of careful handwriting that I'd read dozens of times since receiving it. She wrote me a letter explaining her decision. She was concerned about Derek's financial stability and your tendency to help him out of his difficulties. We help our son when he needs it. That's what parents do. She was afraid you'd mortgage the house or sell it to cover Derek's debts. She wanted to make sure you had a secure place to live for the rest of your lives, but she also wanted the property to stay in responsible hands. Dad stood up abruptly and walked to the window. So what are you saying, Alice? That we don't own our own home? I'm saying I own this home. I've owned it for 2 years, since Grandma's estate was settled. I've been paying the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance costs you thought you were paying. The look of shock on Mom's face would have been comical under different circumstances. What do you mean you've been paying? I set up automatic payments when I received the deed. I figured it was easier than explaining the situation right after Grandma died. I thought there would be a better time to have this conversation. A better time, Dad repeated, his voice flat. And you decided that time was now? When does your brother need help? I decided that time was now when you tried to give away my bedroom without asking my permission. The room went completely quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Your bedroom, Mom said slowly. Alice, it's just a room. It's my room, in my house, and you decided to give it to Derek's family without consulting me? Dad turned back from the window, his expression harder than I'd seen it in years. So that's what this is about? You're going to hold property ownership over our heads because we made a practical decision about space allocation? I'm going to hold property ownership over your heads because you made a unilateral decision about my property and expected me to go along with it. Mom was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. Alice, honey, surely we can work this out. We're family. We're family when you need something from me, Mom. The rest of the time, I'm the daughter whose needs come last. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you asked what I wanted before making a decision that affected me?
When's the last time Derek was expected to accommodate someone else's needs instead of having everyone accommodate his? Dad sat back down heavily. What do you want, Alice? The question hung in the air. What did I want? For 35 years, I'd watched my parents prioritize Derek's needs, Derek's wants, Derek's crises. I'd been the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who didn't cause problems or make demands. I want Derek's family to find their own place to live. I want my room to stay my room. And I want to be consulted before any more decisions are made about my property. Your property, Dad repeated. So we're tenants now? In our own home? You've been tenants all along. You just didn't know it. Mom started crying. Not the dramatic sob she used when she wanted sympathy, but quiet tears that made her look older than her 62 years. Alice, please. Derek's lease is up in 4 days. They have nowhere else to go. They can renew their lease. They can find a different apartment. They can figure out their own housing situation like every other adult in the world. You know they can't afford.
Then maybe Derek should have thought about that before having another baby. Maybe he should have saved money instead of buying that new truck last year. Maybe he should have planned ahead instead of assuming his little sister would bail him out. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. I was tired of tiptoeing around Derek's feelings, tired of pretending his financial irresponsibility was just bad luck. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. I don't know who you've become, Alice, but this isn't the daughter I raised. You raised me to be responsible, to work hard, to plan ahead. You raised me to take care of myself. I learned those lessons very well. You also raised her to put family first, Mom added quietly, to help people when they need it. I have been putting family first. For 35 years, I've been putting this family first. I put family first when I didn't contest Grandma's will, even though it meant taking on financial responsibility for a house I wasn't living in. I put family first when I quietly paid your bills without telling you I owned the property. I put family first when I let you believe you were homeowners because it preserved your dignity. I stood up and gathered the papers back into the folder. But putting family first has never meant letting Derek move his family into my bedroom. That's where I draw the line. Mom looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. So what happens now? Now you call Derek and tell him he needs to find another solution. Now you start treating me like an adult whose opinions matter. And now we all learn to live with the fact that things aren't exactly what we thought they were. I walked toward the front door, then stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, nothing has to change. You can keep living here as long as you want. I'm not going to evict you or charge you rent or make your lives difficult. But I am going to be consulted before any major decisions are made about this house. And Derek's family is not moving into my room. The last thing I saw before closing the door behind me was Dad's face, a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. My phone started ringing at 6:30 the next morning. Derek's name flashed on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 2 minutes later, then again. By the 4th call, I finally answered. What, Derek? What the hell did you do to Mom and Dad? His voice was louder than necessary, that particular volume he used when he was trying to intimidate someone. It worked when we were kids. Now it just sounded desperate. I told them the truth about something they needed to know. Mom was crying all night. Dad hasn't said a word since they called me. You want to explain what kind of truth traumatizes 2 senior citizens? I poured myself coffee and walked out onto my apartment balcony. The morning air was crisp and downtown Portland was just starting to wake up below me. The truth about who owns the house they've been living in. Silence. Then, what are you talking about? Grandma Margaret left the house to me, Derek. Mom and Dad never actually owned it. The silence stretched longer this time. I could hear Christina's voice in the background, asking who was on the phone. That's impossible, Derek finally said. They've lived there my entire life. They've paid for everything. They've lived there, yes, but they never bought it from Grandma. What they thought were mortgage payments were actually just covering taxes and maintenance.
You're lying. I have the deed, Derek. I have Grandma's will. I have her letter explaining why she made this decision. Another pause, more background conversation that I couldn't make out clearly. Even if that's true, Derek said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone, it doesn't change anything. You wouldn't kick your own parents out of their home. I'm not kicking anyone out. I told them they could stay as long as they wanted. Then what's the problem? Mom said you're refusing to let us move into your old room. The entitlement in his voice was staggering. Even after learning that I owned the house, his first concern was whether he could still get what he wanted from me. The problem is that you assumed you could move your family into my room without asking my permission. It's just a room, Alice. You don't even live there. It's my room in my house, and the answer is no. Are you serious right now? We have 4 days to move out of our apartment. Emma needs her own bedroom. The baby needs space for a crib that doesn't take up our entire living room. Then you should have planned better before having another baby. Planned better? His voice shot up an octave. You think anyone plans for the mill to cut hours? You think we planned for Christina to have complications that kept her from working? I think you planned to have your parents bail you out like they always do. Like they always? Alice, what is wrong with you? Since when do you talk to family like this? I sat down in one of my patio chairs and watched a jogger make his way down the street below. Such a normal morning scene while my family imploded over the phone. Since my family started treating me like a doormat whose opinions don't matter. Nobody treats you like a doormat. You're being dramatic. Am I? When's the last time anyone in this family asked what I wanted before making a decision that affected me? This isn't about you, Alice. This is about Emma and the baby. This is about Christina sleeping on a mattress on the floor because we can't fit a real bed in our bedroom with the crib. And that's very sad, Derek, but it's not my responsibility to solve it. I could hear him breathing hard, the way he used to before losing his temper as a teenager. You know what? Fine. Keep your precious room. We'll figure something else out. Good. But don't expect things to go back to normal after this. Don't expect family dinners and birthday parties and pretend we're all happy. I haven't expected those things for years. The line went dead. I finished my coffee and got ready for work, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. The call started again around lunchtime. First Mom, sobbing about how the family was falling apart. Then Dad, demanding to know what I expected them to tell Derek's landlord. Then Derek again, this time with Christina on speakerphone.
Alice, please. Christina's voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. I know you're angry with Derek, but please don't punish the children. Emma keeps asking about the big house with the tire swing. That hit harder than Derek's anger or Mom's tears. Emma was 4 years old, innocent in all of this, and she'd been excited about moving to the house where her daddy grew up. Christina, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not solving Derek's housing crisis for him. But where are we supposed to go? We've looked at apartments we can afford, and they're all in terrible neighborhoods, or so small the kids would have to share a room with us. What about Derek's friend from work, Jake Morrison? Didn't he mention they had extra space when you were looking before? That was months ago. They took in Jake's brother after he got divorced. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache building. What about Christina's sister in Vancouver? Sarah's house is barely big enough for her own family, and Derek can't commute to Portland from there. We went in circles for 20 minutes, with Christina growing more tearful and Derek getting more aggressive in the background. Finally, I told them I had clients waiting and hung up. The rest of the week was a blur of phone calls, text messages, and increasingly desperate pleas. Mom called twice a day, alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and updates on Derek's housing search. Dad called once to inform me that Derek had found a month-to-month rental in a rough part of town and that Emma would have to share a bedroom with the baby. By Friday, I was screening all calls from family members. Saturday morning, I drove to my office to catch up on some bookkeeping, grateful for the quiet.
Henderson's Hardware needed their quarterly reports by Monday, and I'd fallen behind during the week of family drama. I was deep in spreadsheets when someone knocked on my office door. Through the glass, I could see Derek's silhouette. He came in without waiting for permission, looking haggard and angry. His work clothes were wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved in days. "We need to talk." "I'm working, Derek. It's Saturday, and I have deadlines." "I don't care about your deadlines." He sat down across from my desk uninvited, the way he used to do when we were kids and he wanted to commandeer whatever I was doing. "I've spent the last week looking at apartments I can't afford in neighborhoods where I don't want to raise my children. Christina's been crying herself to sleep every night. Emma doesn't understand why we can't live in Grandma's house like Mommy and Daddy promised." "Derek, I'm not finished." He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "I know you think I'm irresponsible. I know you think I made bad choices. Maybe I did, but those are my children we're talking about. My baby daughter deserves better than a one-bedroom apartment above a liquor store. There have to be other options." "What options? Do you know what rent costs in this city? Do you know what it's like to work full-time and still not make enough to provide a decent home for your family? Do you know what it's like to build a business from nothing while everyone in your family assumes you'll drop everything to solve their problems? This isn't about your business, Alice. This is about family helping families. Family helping family would be Derek getting a second job instead of expecting everyone else to sacrifice for his choices." His face flushed red. "You want me to get a second job? When? I already work 50 hours a week at the mill. Christina's up all night with the baby. When exactly am I supposed to work a second job? Other people figure it out. Other people have families who support them instead of kicking them when they're down." We stared at each other across my desk, years of resentment crystallizing in the space between us. "I found a place," he said finally, "a duplex in Riverside. The rent's $800 more than what we can afford, but Christina's going to try to find work she can do from home. We'll figure it out." "Good. But I want you to know something, Alice. This isn't over. Someday you're going to need something from this family. Someday you're going to want help or support or just someone to care about you. And I want you to remember this moment when that day comes." He stood up and walked to the door, then turned back. "Grandma would be ashamed of you." The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral until I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I put my head in my hands and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. 3 weeks passed without a single call from my family. The silence was deafening. I threw myself into work, taking on extra clients and staying at the office until 9 or 10 most nights. Henderson's Hardware led to referrals for 2 other small businesses. The bakery on Morrison Street needed their books straightened out after a messy partnership dissolution. A local construction company wanted help setting up better accounting systems. Success felt hollow when there was nobody to share it with. My apartment, which had always been my sanctuary, started feeling like a prison. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call Mom about some small triumph at work, only to remember that we weren't talking. Sunday dinners at the house on Maple Grove Avenue had been a monthly tradition since I'd moved out, but my chair at the dining room table was probably collecting dust now. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I was leaving my office and spotted a familiar figure across the street. Christina was pushing a stroller down the sidewalk, Emma skipping alongside her, both of them looking tired and subdued. They were coming out of the Riverside Public Library, and I realized they must be living in that duplex Derek had mentioned. I almost called out to them, but something in Christina's posture stopped me. Her shoulders were hunched against the evening chill, and she kept glancing around nervously as they walked. This wasn't the confident young mother I remembered from family gatherings. This was someone who looked beaten down by circumstances. Emma spotted me first. She waved enthusiastically and started running toward me before Christina could stop her. "Aunt Alice! Aunt Alice!" Christina's face went pale when she saw me, but Emma was already wrapping her arms around my legs in an enthusiastic hug. "Hi, sweet pea." I knelt down to her level. "How are you doing?"
We live in a new house now.
It's not as big as Grandma and Grandpa's house, but Mommy says it's cozy. Want to see my new room? I share it with baby Sarah, but she can't play yet because she's too little. Emma, Christina said quietly, we need to get home for dinner. But Emma was already launching into a detailed description of their new living situation. The duplex had thin walls, and the people next door played music late at night. The stairs were steep and scary. Her bedroom window looked out at a parking lot instead of a backyard with a tire swing. Christina looked mortified. Emma, that's enough. It's okay, I said, but Christina was already taking Emma's hand and preparing to leave. Actually, Christina, could we talk for a minute? She hesitated, glancing around as if Derek might materialize from behind a parked car. Derek's working late tonight, double shift at the mill. That explained the nervousness. Derek had probably forbidden her from speaking to me. We walked to a small park a block away, where Emma immediately claimed the swing set and Christina could push the stroller back and forth to keep the baby settled. How are you managing? Christina's laugh was bitter. We're not, really. The rent on the duplex is killing us. I've been trying to find work I can do from home, but everything requires experience I don't have or equipment we can't afford. What kind of work are you looking for? Data entry mostly, virtual assistant stuff. I found one company that seemed promising, but they wanted me to have my own computer and high-speed internet. The duplex only has basic cable internet, and it's unreliable. I watched Emma pump her legs on the swing, her blonde hair flying behind her as she tried to go higher. Derek doesn't know I'm talking to you, Christina said quietly. He'd be furious if he found out. Christina, I never wanted things to get this bad between us. But you did want us to figure it out on our own. The accusation stung because it was true. I wanted Derek to take responsibility instead of expecting everyone else to fix his problems. You think I don't know that Derek makes impulsive decisions? You think I don't wish he'd saved money instead of buying that truck? Christina's voice was sharper now. But I also know that man works harder than anyone gives him credit for. He's been picking up every extra shift he can get, even when it means he doesn't see his daughters for days at a time. I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know, Alice. Derek's pride won't let him tell people how bad things really are. Do you know he's been skipping lunch most days so we can buy formula for the baby? Do you know he sold his tools, the good ones his grandfather left him, to pay the deposit on this place? I felt sick. Derek's tools had been his most prized possessions, inherited from our great-grandfather who'd been a master carpenter. Christina, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, because Derek would rather suffer in silence than admit he needs help, especially from his little sister who thinks he's irresponsible. Emma had gotten bored with the swings and was now climbing on the jungle gym, her laughter echoing across the empty park. What can I do to help? Christina shook her head. It's too late for that. Derek's convinced you hate him. Your parents are caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both of you. The whole family's walking on eggshells. I don't hate Derek. Then why won't you let us stay in your room, just temporarily, until we get back on our feet? The question I'd been avoiding for weeks. Why was I so determined to keep that bedroom empty when my brother's family was struggling? Because, I said slowly, if I let Derek move in every time he has a crisis, he'll never learn to handle them himself. And if you don't, his children suffer for his mistakes. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Alice, but family is supposed to be. We sat in silence, watching Emma play while the baby dozed in her stroller. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the park. There might be another solution, I said finally. Christina looked up. What kind of solution? The basement in the house on Maple Grove Avenue. It's not finished, but it's dry and warm. With some work, it could be converted into a temporary apartment. Derek would never accept charity from you, not after everything that's happened.
It wouldn't be charity. He'd pay rent, whatever he can afford, and he'd help with the renovation work, make it a real partnership instead of a handout. Christina was quiet for a long moment, considering. He might go for that if it was presented as a business arrangement instead of family helping family. Would you talk to him about it? I can try, but Alice, you need to understand something. Derek's not just angry about the house situation. He's angry about years of feeling like the family disappointment, while you were the golden child who could do no wrong. I was never the golden child. Weren't you? You went to college, started your own business, never needed anyone's help. Meanwhile, Derek's been struggling to keep his head above water since high school, and every time he fails, it just proves he's not as smart or capable as his little sister. The revelation hit me like a slap. All these years, I thought Derek was the favored one, while I'd been overlooked. But from his perspective, I was the successful daughter who made his failures look worse by comparison. I never meant to make him feel that way. I know, but intentions don't always matter. What matters is what happens next. Emma ran over to us, breathless and pink-cheeked from playing. "Mommy, I'm hungry. Can we go home now?" Christina stood and started packing up the diaper bag. "We should go. Derek will worry if we're not there when he gets home."
Christina, about the basement idea? I'll talk to him tonight. But Alice, if you're going to make this offer, you have to be all in. Derek can't handle another rejection right now. It would break something in him that might not heal. I watched them walk away into the gathering dusk, Emma chattering about her adventure at the park, while Christina navigated the stroller over uneven sidewalk. They looked like any other young family heading home for dinner, but I knew they were carrying burdens that shouldn't have been so heavy. That night, I called Mom for the first time in 3 weeks. "Alice?" Her voice was cautious, like she wasn't sure if I was calling to argue or apologize. "Hi, Mom. I was wondering if you had some time this weekend to talk about renovating the basement." Saturday morning found me standing in my parents' basement with a contractor named Mike Hendricks, discussing the feasibility of converting the space into a livable apartment. Mom hovered nearby, alternating between excitement and worry, while Dad measured walls with his old metal tape measure. "The foundation's solid," Mike said, running his hand along the concrete wall. "You've got a good ceiling height. 7.5 feet isn't luxury, but it's workable. The real question is plumbing and electrical." He pointed to the corner where Dad's workbench stood. "You'd want to put a bathroom there, where it's closest to the main water line. The kitchen could go along this wall. Nothing fancy, but functional. That leaves the rest of the space for living and sleeping areas." "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" I asked. "If we're talking basic but livable, maybe 6 weeks. Depends on permits and inspections." Mom wrung her hands. 6 weeks? Derek's family needs somewhere to stay now. "They have somewhere to stay," I said gently. "This would be an upgrade, not an emergency solution." Dad had been unusually quiet during the whole inspection. Now he cleared his throat. "What's this going to cost?" Mike pulled out his calculator and scribbled some notes. "Materials and labor, you're probably looking at $15,000 to $20,000 for something decent. Could go cheaper with DIY on some of the finishing work." The number made Mom gasp. Dad's face went ashen. "We don't have that kind of money," Mom whispered. "I do. I'd expected this moment. I'll cover the renovation costs." "Alice, that's too much." "It's an investment in my property. Derek will pay rent once he moves in, so I'll recoup the costs eventually." "And if Derek says no to this whole arrangement?" I'd been dreading that possibility all week. "Then I'll have a nice basement apartment to rent out to someone else." Dad was studying the blueprints Mike had sketched. "This bathroom placement makes sense, and if we put the kitchen here, there'd be a natural separation between the living space and sleeping area." It was the first time he'd engaged with the project, instead of just tolerating it. Mike packed up his materials. "Let me work up a formal estimate. If you decide to move forward, I could start next week." After he left, the 3 of us stood in the basement trying to envision it transformed. "Derek doesn't know about this yet," Mom said carefully. Christina was going to talk to him.
I haven't heard back from her. And if he refuses? Then at least we tried. Dad sat down on his workbench, looking older than his 64 years. Alice, I owe you an apology. The words surprised me. Dad wasn't much for emotional conversations. For what? For assuming we could make decisions about your property without consulting you, for taking your accommodation for granted all these years. Dad, let me finish. When your mother called Derek about moving in, I should have asked what you thought first. This is your house, and we treated you like a child whose opinion didn't matter. Mom nodded, her eyes bright with tears. We've been doing that for years, haven't we? Assuming you'd go along with whatever we decided because you never complained. I didn't want to cause problems. And we took advantage of that, Dad said. Derek's always been the squeaky wheel, so he got the grease, but that wasn't fair to you. The apology I'd wanted for years had finally come, but it felt bittersweet in the empty basement. I should have told you about the house ownership sooner. When? Mom asked. When would have been a good time to learn that everything we thought we knew about our living situation was wrong? I kept waiting for the right moment, but there never was one. Dad stood up and walked to the window that looked out onto the backyard. Margaret was a smart woman, smarter than we gave her credit for, apparently. She was trying to protect you. She knew Derek would always need help, and she was afraid you'd sacrifice your security to provide it. She was probably right, Mom said quietly. We would have mortgaged this place to help him if we'd owned it. The admission hung in the air between us. The question now is whether Derek will accept this arrangement, Dad said. His pride's been hurt pretty badly. Christina said she'll talk to him. Christina's been carrying a heavy load, Mom observed. That girl's tougher than she looks, but she's worn thin. I saw them at the library last week. Emma seemed happy enough, but Christina looked exhausted. Derek's been working double shifts to make the rent on that duplex. Sometimes he doesn't get home until after the girls are asleep. The picture Mom painted made me feel sick with guilt. While I'd been protecting my principles, Derek had been working himself to exhaustion trying to provide for his family. Maybe I should call Christina, I said. See if she's had a chance to discuss the basement idea with Derek.
Give her time, Dad advised. Derek needs to feel like this is his decision, not something being pushed on him. We went upstairs, and Mom made coffee while I calculated renovation costs in my head. $20,000 was significant, but manageable. If Derek paid even a modest rent, I'd break even within 2 years. The phone rang just after noon. Christina's voice was cautious but hopeful. Alice, I talked to Derek about the basement apartment idea. How did he take it? Better than I expected, actually. He wanted to see the space and discuss terms, but he didn't immediately say no. Relief flooded through me. When would be good for him? Tonight, after work. He gets off at 6. I'll be there. Alice, there are some conditions. He wants this to be a formal rental agreement with a security deposit and everything official. He doesn't want it to feel like charity. That's fine. I was hoping for a business arrangement anyway. And he wants to do some of the renovation work himself to reduce the costs and give him some sweat equity in the project. Mike Hendricks said the more DIY work we can do, the cheaper it gets. There's one more thing, Christina's voice dropped. Derek wants to apologize to you for the things he said at your office and for how he's handled this whole situation. The conversation at my office felt like a lifetime ago. He doesn't need to apologize, Christina. We both said things. He does need to apologize, and you need to let him, Alice. His pride is all tangled up with feeling like he's failed his family. If he can't make this right with you, he'll never feel like he deserves the help. I understood. Derek needed to rebuild his self-respect as much as he needed affordable housing. I'll see you both tonight. That evening, I drove to Maple Grove Avenue with a folder full of rental agreements I'd printed from online templates. The basement looked different now that I could envision its potential, not just a storage space, but a real home for Derek's family. Derek arrived at 6:15, still in his work clothes and smelling faintly of sawdust from the mill. He looked tired but determined. Alice, he nodded stiffly, thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course. We stood there awkwardly until Mom suggested we sit at the kitchen table to discuss details.
Derek pulled out a notebook where he'd apparently been calculating finances. I can pay $400 a month in rent, plus utilities. I know that's probably below market rate, but it's what I can afford right now. $400 sounds reasonable for a basement apartment. I want to sign a lease, something official that protects both of us. I slid the rental agreement across the table. I brought some standard forms. We can modify them however you want. Derek reviewed the paperwork carefully, asking questions about security deposits and lease terms. This was a different Derek than the one who'd stormed into my office, focused, professional, taking responsibility. About the renovation work, he said finally, I'd like to handle the painting, flooring installation, and basic carpentry. I still have some tools, and I know what I'm doing. That would help keep costs down. I also want to apologize, he met my eyes directly, for the things I said to you and for assuming you'd go along with our plans without asking what you wanted. Derek, let me finish. I've been angry with you for years, Alice. Angry that everything came so easy to you while I struggled with everything. Angry that Mom and Dad bragged about your business success while treating my job like it didn't matter. Angry that you never seemed to need anyone's help. His honesty was painful to hear. But that anger made me blind to the sacrifices you were making. Christina told me you've been paying the taxes and insurance on this house for 2 years without telling anyone. You've been protecting Mom and Dad's dignity while taking on financial responsibility for property you don't even live in. I could afford it. That's not the point. The point is, you've been looking out for this family in ways I never realized. And instead of being grateful, I tried to make you feel guilty for not giving me more. The kitchen was completely quiet, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I don't want your gratitude, Derek. I want us to be a family again. Then, let's try this. Let me rent your basement apartment, pay you honest rent for honest value, and see if we can figure out how to be siblings instead of competitors. I looked around the table at my parents' hopeful faces and Derek's determined expression. I think that sounds perfect. 2 months later, I stood in what had once been my parents' cluttered basement, now transformed into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment. Derek was installing the final cabinet handles in the kitchenette, while Emma bounced excitedly on the new living room carpet. Aunt Alice, look, this is going to be my princess castle. Emma had claimed the smaller bedroom and was already arranging her stuffed animals on the built-in shelves Derek had constructed. Christina emerged from the main bedroom, where she'd been setting up the baby's crib. Alice, I can't believe this is the same space. It's absolutely beautiful. The transformation had been remarkable. What Mike Hendricks had started, Derek had finished with meticulous attention to detail. The concrete walls were now covered with warm beige paint and wainscoting. Laminate flooring that looked like hardwood stretched throughout the main living area. The kitchen featured white cabinets, butcher block countertops, and energy-efficient appliances that Derek had found at a scratch and dent warehouse. Derek did most of the finish work, I said, watching my brother adjust a cabinet door that wasn't hanging quite right. Don't sell yourself short, Derek called from the kitchen. You picked out all the materials, coordinated with the contractors, and spent half your weekends down here helping with installation. It was true. Over the past 8 weeks, Derek and I had worked side by side more than we had since childhood. I'd learned that my brother was incredibly skilled with his hands, able to visualize solutions to problems that would have stumped me. He'd learned that I was surprisingly handy with a paintbrush and had a good eye for design details.
More importantly, we'd learned how to talk to each other without the weight of old resentments coloring every conversation. Mom appeared at the bottom of the stairs carrying a casserole dish. "Dinner's ready upstairs whenever you are. I made Derek's favorite, tuna noodle casserole." "In 5 minutes, Mom. Just want to finish this last handle." Dad followed Mom down, carrying baby Sarah in his arms. At 6 months old, she'd become the family's undisputed princess, completely adored by her grandfather, who'd spent the renovation weeks building her a custom changing table and toy chest. "The bathroom fixtures look professional," Dad observed, peering into the small but functional bathroom Derek had tiled himself. "You did good work, son." The pride in Dad's voice was unmistakable. For weeks, he'd been bragging to neighbors about Derek's craftsmanship and work ethic. The son who'd once been seen as the family disappointment was now being praised for his practical skills and dedication. Christina had thrived during the renovation period, too.
With the immediate housing crisis resolved and a secure future ahead, she'd relaxed enough to start an online bookkeeping course. 3 clients had already hired her for part-time work she could do from home, bringing in extra income that eased the financial pressure on Derek. Alice, Derek said, setting down his screwdriver, before we go upstairs, I wanted to show you something. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, thick paper, officially sized, with the return address of Portland Community Bank. What is it? A loan approval letter. I applied for a small business loan to start my own handyman service. I stared at the letter, surprised by the mixture of pride and concern that flooded through me. Derek, that's wonderful, but are you sure you're ready for the financial risk? I'm sure. This renovation project proved to me that I have marketable skills. Mike Hendricks has already offered to recommend me to his clients for finish work and small remodeling jobs. Christina beamed at her husband. He's already got 3 jobs lined up for next month. The loan is small, Derek continued, just enough to buy some quality tools and a used truck for hauling materials. If it doesn't work out, I can pay it back from my mill wages. But you think it will work out. I think I'm finally ready to bet on myself instead of waiting for someone else to solve my problems. The admission was a milestone. Derek had spent years bouncing between optimistic plans and self-defeating behavior, never quite believing he could succeed on his own terms. Now he radiated the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven his capabilities to himself. Emma ran over and tugged on my sleeve. Aunt Alice, will you help me paint my room? Daddy said I can pick any color I want. What color are you thinking? Purple, like a real princess room. Derek laughed. We just finished renovating down here. Maybe let's live in it for a while before we start painting bedrooms. But Daddy... How about this? I interrupted. We'll make a deal. If you keep your room clean for a whole month, I'll help you paint it whatever color you want. Emma's eyes widened. Even sparkly purple? Even sparkly purple. Deal! She shook my hand solemnly, then ran off to inspect her future princess castle. We headed upstairs for dinner, the whole family together for the first time in months. The dining room table had been extended to accommodate everyone, with Emma's booster seat positioned between Derek and Christina and a high chair for baby Sarah next to Mom. As we passed around Mom's casserole and Dad carved the roast chicken, the conversation flowed easily. Derek described his business plans, while Christina talked about her bookkeeping clients. Mom updated everyone on neighborhood gossip, and Dad shared stories from his volunteer work at the local food bank. I realized this was what I'd been missing during all those years of family dinners where I'd felt like an outsider. Not just the physical presence at the table, but the sense of belonging, of being valued for who I was rather than tolerated despite who I wasn't. Alice, Mom said during dessert, I keep meaning to ask, how's business been? Good, really good actually. I hired an assistant last month to help with the bookkeeping overflow, and I'm considering expanding into tax preparation services. That's fantastic, Derek said. You know, once I get my handyman business established, maybe we could refer clients to each other. Small business owners always need bookkeeping help, and my accounting clients sometimes need home repairs. The suggestion surprised me with its simple elegance. Derek and I working together professionally while maintaining our separate identities and businesses. I'd like that. After dinner, Derek and I walked outside to check on his truck, parked in the driveway beside my car. The early autumn air was crisp, and the first leaves were starting to turn on the old oak tree. Alice, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you regret it? Fighting me on the bedroom thing, I mean. We could have avoided all the drama if you'd just said yes from the beginning. I considered the question while we walked. No, I don't regret it. If I'd said yes immediately, you would have moved in as the favored son whose little sister gave up her room for him. Instead, you're moving in as my tenant, paying fair rent for a space we improved together. And that makes a difference? All the difference in the world. You're not the family charity case anymore, Derek. You're my business partner and my brother. He nodded slowly. Christina said something similar. She said I needed to stop thinking of myself as someone who needed rescuing and start thinking of myself as someone capable of building solutions. Christina's a smart woman. The smartest. I definitely married up. We stood quietly for a moment, looking at the house where we'd both grown up. The white clapboard siding gleamed in the porch light, and warm yellow light spilled from the windows where our family was cleaning up from dinner. "One more question," Derek said. "What happens to all this when Mom and Dad are gone? Do you want to sell the house or keep it in the family, or what?" It was a question I'd been avoiding, but Derek deserved an honest answer.
I'd like to keep it in the family if that's financially feasible. Maybe you could buy it from me when you're ready, or we could work out some kind of inheritance arrangement, but we don't have to decide that now. I'd like to buy it someday. Give Emma and Sarah the same kind of childhood we had here. I think Grandma Margaret would like that. You think she'd approve of how this all worked out? I looked up at the second-story window that had been my bedroom for 17 years, the window where I'd sat countless nights, reading by lamplight or staring out at the oak tree while planning my future. I think she'd be proud of both of us, you for learning to stand on your own, and me for learning when to bend. Derek smiled. Grandma always said the strongest trees were the ones that could sway in the wind without breaking. She was full of wisdom like that. Yeah, she was. We headed back inside, where Emma was already getting sleepy and baby Sarah was fussing for her evening feeding. The family gradually dispersed. Derek and Christina to their new basement apartment, Mom and Dad to their evening television programs, and me to my own apartment across town. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Portland, I reflected on how much had changed in just 3 months. I'd gone from being the overlooked daughter to the family's landlord and business partner. Derek had transformed from the irresponsible older brother to a motivated entrepreneur and tenant. Our parents had learned to see both of their children as adults, capable of making their own decisions. Most importantly, we'd all learned that family relationships don't have to be stuck in childhood patterns forever. With effort and honesty, even the most entrenched dynamics can evolve into something healthier and more respectful. My phone buzzed with a text message as I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. Christina had sent a photo of Emma's first night in her new room, fast asleep in her toddler bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and fairy lights. "Thank you for giving us a home," the message read. "Not just the apartment, but the feeling of belonging somewhere again." I saved the photo and headed upstairs to my own home, grateful for a family that had finally learned to see each other clearly, and for grandmothers wise enough to plan for futures they wouldn't live to see. 6 months had passed since Derek's family moved into the basement apartment, and the rhythm of our new arrangement had settled into something surprisingly comfortable. I was reviewing quarterly tax reports in my office when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Collins Accounting, this is Alice." "Miss Collins, this is Janet Morrison from Channel 7 News. We're doing a feature story about creative housing solutions in Portland's rental crisis, and your name came up as someone who's found an innovative way to help family members while addressing the housing shortage." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "I'm sorry, who gave you my name?" "Mike Hendricks, actually. He mentioned your basement conversion project when we interviewed him about affordable renovation solutions. He said it was one of the most thoughtful family housing arrangements he'd seen." "I'm not sure I'd be comfortable with a news interview." "Oh, we wouldn't use your name or show the property without permission. We're more interested in the concept, how families are adapting existing properties to accommodate multiple generations while maintaining everyone's independence and dignity." The phrase caught my attention. Independence and dignity. That had been the key to making our arrangement work. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. I'll email you some information about the segment. Take your time deciding." After hanging up, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically our family dynamics had changed. Derek's handyman business was thriving. He now had more work than he could handle and was considering hiring an assistant. Christina's bookkeeping service had grown to 12 regular clients, and she was planning to get her certification as a QuickBooks Pro advisor. Emma had successfully kept her room clean for 2 months running, so we'd painted it the promised sparkly purple, complete with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Baby Sarah was walking now, toddling around the basement apartment with fearless enthusiasm, while her grandfather followed behind, baby-proofing everything within reach. More surprisingly, Mom and Dad seemed genuinely happier with the multi-generational living arrangement than they'd been in years. Having their grandchildren so close meant daily interactions instead of weekly visits, and Derek's help with household maintenance had taken a burden off Dad's aging shoulders. The phone rang again. This time it was Derek.
Alice, are you busy tonight? Christina and I wanted to talk to you about something. Everything okay? Everything's great. That's actually what we want to discuss. That evening, I found Derek and Christina at their small dining table, looking unusually formal. Derek was wearing his good shirt, and Christina had put on makeup, something she rarely bothered with for casual family dinners. This feels very official, I said, accepting the cup of coffee Christina offered. In a way, it is. Derek pulled out a folder I recognized, the lease agreement we'd signed 8 months ago. Already, time flies. We want to renew, obviously. This place has been perfect for our family, but we also want to propose some changes to the terms. Christina leaned forward. Derek's business is doing well enough that we can afford to pay market rate now. We've been researching comparable basement apartments, and we think $400 is significantly below what you could get from other tenants. I started to protest, but Derek held up his hand. Let me finish. We want to pay $600 a month, starting with the new lease. It's still a good deal for us compared to what we'd pay for a 2-bedroom apartment anywhere else in the city, but it's fairer compensation for what you're providing. Derek, you don't need to. Yes, we do. Alice, this arrangement only works long-term if both sides feel like they're getting fair value. You've been subsidizing our housing for months while we got back on our feet. Now it's time for us to pay our actual share. Christina nodded. We also want to contribute to a fund for major house maintenance, new roof, furnace repairs, things like that. This is our home too, and we should help maintain it. The conversation reminded me of something Grandma Margaret had written in her letter about responsible homeownership being a partnership, not a burden shouldered by one person.
What about Mom and Dad? Have you discussed this with them? We've been talking to them about contributing to household expenses too, Derek said. Dad's been feeling guilty about not paying rent, even though you told him he doesn't need to. We think everyone would feel better with a clear arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Christina pulled out a notebook filled with calculations. We were thinking Mom and Dad could handle the utilities and property taxes. Their Social Security and Dad's pension make that feasible. Derek and I pay rent and contribute to the maintenance fund. You handle mortgage payments, major repairs, and building improvements. There's no mortgage. You know what I mean. The equivalent of what mortgage payments would be goes into your investment in the property. It was a remarkably thorough plan that addressed everyone's financial dignity while ensuring the property was well maintained. There's one more thing, Derek said, looking slightly nervous. Christina and I have been talking about the future. We love living here, and we'd like Emma and Sarah to grow up in this house. If you're ever ready to sell, we'd like the first opportunity to buy. At fair market value, Christina added quickly, not some family discount that would make you feel like you're giving away your inheritance. The conversation was surreal. A year ago, Derek had been the financially irresponsible brother who expected family bailouts. Now he was proposing a comprehensive real estate arrangement that protected everyone's interests. Have you thought about what you'd do if I said yes to selling someday? We've been saving money specifically for that possibility. Between Derek's business income and my bookkeeping clients, we could probably qualify for a mortgage within the next few years. And if you couldn't? Derek and Christina exchanged a glance. Then we'd find somewhere else to live, Derek said firmly. Alice, we're not going to put you in a position where you feel trapped by family obligations. This house is your asset, and you should be free to make whatever decisions are best for your future. The maturity of the statement took my breath away. This was the conversation I'd wanted to have a year ago, Derek acknowledging that my ownership came with both rights and responsibilities. Actually, I said slowly, I've been thinking about something else entirely. What's that? What would you think about eventually buying the house together as partners? You'd gradually buy out my share over time, but we'd co-own it during the transition period. Christina's eyes widened. Like a rent-to-own arrangement? More like a family partnership. You'd build equity with every payment, and I'd maintain a stake in the property until you're ready to take full ownership. It would give you the security of homeownership without the pressure of qualifying for a large mortgage immediately. Derek was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications. That's incredibly generous, Alice. But what's in it for you? You could sell to someone else for full market value.
What's in it for me is knowing this house stays in the family and continues to be a home where Emma and Sarah can grow up in. That's worth more to me than maximizing profit. We'd want to make sure it's legally structured to protect both sides, Christina said practically. Clear agreements about what happens if someone wants out of the partnership or if financial circumstances change. Absolutely. We'd need lawyers and proper contracts. But if you're interested in the concept, we could start exploring the details. Derek reached across the table and shook my hand formally. Consider us very interested. The next morning, I called Mom to update her on the conversation. Her reaction was immediate enthusiasm mixed with emotional tears. Alice, honey, that's the most wonderful thing I've heard in years. To think this house could stay in the family, that Emma and Sarah could have the same childhood you and Derek had here. It's just an idea at this point, Mom. We need to work out all the details. But it's a beautiful idea, and it shows how much you've both grown up. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to discuss the feasibility of a family partnership arrangement. She outlined several options that could work, each with different tax implications and legal protections.
The key, she explained, is making sure everyone's expectations are clearly documented. Family real estate deals can be wonderful when they're done right, but they can destroy relationships when they're handled poorly. What makes them work? Treating it like a business transaction that happens to involve people you love, rather than a family favor that happens to involve money. That evening, I drove to Maple Grove Avenue for dinner. The house looked exactly the same from the outside, but everything about it felt different now. This wasn't just my childhood home or my inherited property. It was becoming a true family compound where multiple generations could thrive together while maintaining their independence. Emma ran out to greet me as I parked, her purple-stained fingers evidence of an afternoon art project. "Aunt Alice, guess what? Daddy's teaching me how to use real tools. I'm going to help him build a treehouse in the backyard." "That sounds amazing, sweetheart." Derek emerged from the basement entrance, covered in sawdust and grinning. "I'm building a workshop down there. Christina convinced me I need a proper space for my business equipment." "Taking over more of the basement?" "Just the storage room you never used. Want to see the plans?" As we walked through the house, I realized that the space was evolving organically to meet our family's changing needs. What had started as my desperate attempt to maintain control over my property had become something none of us could have planned, a genuine partnership between adults who'd learned to respect each other's contributions and limitations. At dinner, Dad raised his glass of iced tea in a toast. "To Alice, for teaching us that the strongest families aren't the ones that never face conflict, but the ones that learn how to work through it together." "To Derek," I replied, "for proving that people can change when they're ready to take responsibility for their own lives." "To Christina," Derek added, "for keeping us all sane during the worst of it." "To Mom and Dad," Christina concluded, "for raising children who eventually figured out how to be adults." Emma banged her sippy cup against the table. "To Aunt Alice for letting us live in the princess basement." We all laughed, and I realized that whatever happened with the house partnership or Derek's business or my own future plans, we'd already accomplished something more valuable than any real estate transaction. We'd become a family that actually liked each other. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Derek walked me to my car. "Alice, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up on us. A year ago, I was ready to write you off as the selfish sister who cared more about property rights than family welfare. And now? Now I know you were the wise sister who understood that real family support sometimes means saying no to what people want so you can give them what they actually need." I hugged my brother, not the obligatory family hug we'd exchanged for years, but a real embrace between two people who'd fought hard to understand each other. "Grandma Margaret would be proud of us," I said. "Yeah," Derek replied, looking up at the house where 4 generations of our family had now found ways to build their lives. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.